We were, from the outside, a masterpiece. A carefully composed photograph of modern love, all warm lighting and effortless smiles. Olivia and I had built a life that people pointed to, a benchmark for their own relationships. We were the couple who still held hands at the grocery store, whose laughter was a private language spoken in crowded rooms, whose anniversaries were marked not by obligation, but by a genuine, almost sacred, reverence for the day we began. She was a force of nature, my Olivia. A woman whose loyalty was a tangible thing, a shield she held up for those she loved. Her passion was a wildfire, consuming everything she did, from her work in art curation to the way she argued about politics. Her laughter could rewrite the mood of an entire room, a bright, cascading sound that made you believe, for a moment, that joy was the world's default setting. But a masterpiece, viewed up close, reveals its brushstrokes, its imperfections, the darker pigments layered beneath the light. Olivia's masterpiece had a shadow, a possessive streak that, over the years, had sharpened from a soft smudge into a cutting edge. It hadn't always been a weapon. In the beginning, in the soft focused days of our courtship, her jealousy was a form of flattery. A playful pout when a waitress's smile lingered on me for a second too long. A teasing jab about the women in my department. It was a quirk, I told myself, a charming flaw in an otherwise perfect design. It felt like proof of her affection, a sign that she was afraid to lose what we had. Then, my career in advertising began to climb. The world I inhabited was a curated reality, a high-gloss universe populated by models whose faces were architectural marvels, actors who could sell you a dream in 30 seconds, and influencers who commanded armies with a single post. It was a world of late-night shoots under hot studio lights, of urgent texts at midnight, of dinners with clients that bled into the early hours of the morning. Olivia, my loyal Olivia, claimed she understood. She would kiss my cheek as I left, her smile a perfect, practiced curve. But I could see the tension gathering behind her eyes, a storm building on a distant horizon. I could feel it in the way her hand would tighten on mine when a female colleague greeted me at a company event, a subtle pressure that said, mine. The storm finally broke on a Tuesday morning. The air in our bedroom was thick with the unspoken. I was buttoning my shirt, the familiar ritual a flimsy shield against the cold front that had moved into our home. Olivia stood in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest, a sentinel guarding the border of her own unhappiness. Another late one, she said. It wasn't a question. Her tone was as smooth and flat as a river stone, but her eyes were sharp, analytical. They were taking inventory of my exhaustion, my pressed suit, my resolve. Yeah, we're finalizing the campaign. I replied, my voice sounding hollow in the charged silence. It's crunch time. You know how it is. She nodded, a slow, deliberate motion that conveyed nothing and everything. She didn't move, just leaned against the doorframe, her gaze a physical weight on my skin. It was a look I couldn't decipher, a cocktail of resentment, suspicion, and a sorrow so deep it felt ancient. Liv, I said, abandoning my tie and walking toward her. I took her hands in mine. They were cold. You know you're the only one for me, right? You know that. A smile touched her lips, but it was a ghost of her real one. It didn't reach her eyes, didn't warm the chill in her fingers. I know, she whispered, her voice a thread of sound. I hate sharing you. With all of them. I kissed her forehead, a desperate attempt to transfer my own certainty into her, to soothe the restless beast of her insecurity. You're not sharing me. This is just work. Once this campaign is wrapped, it's just us. We'll have all the time in the world. She nodded again, but her silence was an answer in itself. It clung to the air after she left the room, a lingering shadow that followed me out the door and into the glaring light of the city. The true fracture came a few weeks later. I was sprawled on the couch, the day's stress slowly seeping out of me, when Olivia stormed into the living room. She moved with a terrible, rigid purpose, her face pale, her knuckles white around the slick black rectangle of my phone. Who is Jade? She demanded. Her voice wasn't loud, but it trembled with a seismic blend of fury and heartbreak that shook the room more than any shout could have. I blinked, my mind sluggishly trying to catch up. Jade? She's one of the models on the campaign. What? She didn't answer. Instead, she thrust the phone at my face, her hand shaking. And there it was, glowing on the screen, a message that in any other context would have been utterly benign. Good morning. Can't wait for today's shoot. Here's the final image for approval, asterisk. Below the text was a photograph. Jade, in the campaign outfit, standing against a stark white background. She was beautiful, of course, but it was a professional beauty, a sterile, commercial perfection. Her expression was neutral, her posture poised. It was an image meant to sell a product, nothing more. Explain this, Olivia commanded, her voice now dropping to an icy whisper. A wave of exhaustion washed over me, heavy and suffocating. I could see the entire argument laid out before me like a map of a war-torn country. Liv, this is work. I told you. She's one of the models. That's the image we're using for the final print ad. There is nothing more to it. Her eyes narrowed into slits of disbelief. Good morning. Can't wait for today, she quoted, her voice dripping with venomous sarcasm. That doesn't sound like just work to me, Ryan. It is just work, I insisted, fighting to keep my voice from rising to meet hers. She's being professional. Polite. It's what people do. But Olivia was gone, lost to the raging currents of her own narrative. She began to pace the length of our Persian rug, her hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. Do you think I'm stupid? Do you honestly think I'm that naive? You're surrounded by women like her all day, every day. Polished, perfect women. How am I supposed to believe you? Because I love you. I cut in, my voice finally breaking, raw and firm. Because for all our years together, I have never, not once, given you a single reason not to trust me. Her laughter was a shard of glass. Sharp, bitter, and meant to draw blood. Maybe not before, she hissed, her eyes locking onto mine. But this looks like a reason. That night, the chasm between our sides of the bed felt miles wide. She lay with her back to me, a rigid silhouette against the moonlight filtering through the blinds. I tried to speak, to build a bridge across the suffocating silence, but every word I offered, of reassurance, of explanation, of love, felt like a pebble tossed into a void. It was swallowed whole, making no sound, leaving no ripple. As I finally drifted into a fitful sleep, I felt the terrifying certainty that we were drifting apart, pulled by currents I couldn't see, toward a place from which we might never return. I didn't know it then, but that text, so innocuous and professional, wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a lit fuse, and the life we thought we had was about to be reduced to ash. Olivia's silence in the days that followed was a living entity. It had weight and texture. It took up space in our house. It was heavier than any argument, more cutting than any accusation. She hadn't screamed at me again after that night, but her body had become a testament to her fury. The cold glances that slid past me as if I were a piece of furniture. The almost imperceptible flinch when my hand brushed hers. The way she angled her body away from me in bed, creating a fortress of pillows and blankets. Even her smiles, when we were forced into social situations, were brittle things, threatening to shatter at the slightest pressure. I told myself it was a storm that would pass. I clung to the history of us, to the memory of every other fight we'd navigated, every disagreement we'd resolved. We always found our way back. But this felt different. This wasn't a temporary squall, it was a climate change. She was holding on to her anger not as a weapon, but as a shield, and I couldn't find a way past it. The small changes began to accumulate, like dust motes slowly obscuring a clear pane of glass. Her phone, once left casually on the coffee table, was now her constant companion, a third hand she never set down. When it buzzed, a quick, furtive glance, a tilt of the screen away from me, her lips pressing into a thin, unreadable line. Work became her sanctuary, or her excuse. Late nights at the gallery, once a rarity, became the norm. Deadlines, I asked one evening, trying to keep the edge of suspicion from my voice as she walked in hours after she was due home. I was trying to sound like a concerned husband, not an interrogator. People change, Ryan, she replied, not looking up from her laptop as she breezed past me. The words were casual, but they landed like stones. I tried to force a breakthrough, to drain the poison before it could corrupt everything. We were sitting at the dinner table, the clinking of our forks against the porcelain the only sound in the room. I set mine down, the noise unnaturally loud. Liv, we need to talk. She looked up, her expression a blank canvas. About what? About us, I said, leaning forward, trying to will her to meet me in the middle. I feel like you're building a wall, brick by brick, and I don't know why. I don't know how to stop you. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped her. It was a sound I'd never heard from her before. Maybe that's because I don't want you to stop me. The word struck me with physical force. What is that supposed to mean? It means I'm tired, Ryan. Her voice finally rose, cracking with a resentment that had been simmering for weeks. I am so tired of feeling like I'm in a constant competition. With your job, with your glamorous colleagues, with your precious Jade. Liv, for the last time, there is nothing between me and Jade. My own frustration was finally boiling over. It was a work text. A single, professional, meaningless text. You still don't get it, do you? She snapped, shoving her chair back from the table. The legs screeched against the hardwood floor. It was never just about the text. It's about the fact that I don't feel seen by you anymore. I don't feel like we matter. Her words hung in the air, vibrating with a terrible finality, long after she had stormed from the room. The next morning, an unsettling calm had settled over her. It felt like the eerie stillness in the eye of a hurricane. She kissed me goodbye before she left for work, a fleeting, cool press of her lips against my cheek. It was a ghost of her old affection, and I clung to it desperately, hoping it was a sign of a thaw. That evening, I came home to find her on the couch with Sophie, her best friend. They were huddled together, their heads close, their voices low and conspiratorial. The conversation died the instant I walked in. Sophie offered me a smile that was all teeth, tight and uncomfortable. Olivia didn't even bother to look up. Hey, I said, the word feeling clumsy and intrusive. What's going on? Nothing. Olivia replied, her tone as flat and gray as a winter sky. Just catching up. The tension in the room was a physical thing, a pressure against my chest. Sophie made a hasty excuse and left a few minutes later, leaving Olivia and me in the suffocating silence she had created. Are you okay? I asked, sitting on the opposite end of the couch. I'm fine, she said, her gaze fixed on the blank television screen. Just tired. I wanted to push. I wanted to ask what secrets she was sharing with Sophie, what plans were being hatched in those hushed tones. But something in her posture, in the way she held herself as if bracing for an impact, stopped me. She looked at me not as a husband, but as a stranger she was forced to share a space with, a problem she was still figuring out how to solve. The strangeness escalated. She started dressing differently, sleeker fabrics, sharper silhouettes, higher heels, a kind of emotional armor. Her laughter, when she was on the phone, was bright and genuine, but the moment I entered the room, it would cut off, the light in her eyes extinguishing as if a switch had been flipped. I tried to rationalize it. She's still hurting. She needs space. This is how she's coping. But a cold, dark dread was beginning to coil in my gut. This wasn't coping. This was something else entirely. One night, lying awake beside her rigid, sleeping form, I stared at the ceiling and finally admitted the truth to myself. The Olivia I had married, the woman whose default setting was joy, the partner who would pull me into her arms and absorb my stress as if it were her own, was gone. She had been replaced by this polished, cold stranger who looked at me with eyes I no longer recognized. I wanted to believe this was a chapter, not the end of the book. I wanted to believe we could find our way back. But as the days bled into one another, that belief was cracking, splintering piece by piece, and I was utterly powerless to stop it from shattering completely. I thought we were in a cold war, a battle of attrition fought with silence and distance. I thought the objective was a truce, a return to the fragile peace we once knew. I was wrong. The objective was annihilation, and I was the target. Olivia wasn't pulling away. She was positioning her pieces on the board. Revenge wasn't a byproduct of her pain. It was the entire point. It started with small acts of psychological warfare, so subtle they were almost deniable. She would come home smelling faintly of a cologne I didn't wear, something expensive and spicy. When I'd ask about her day, she would recount a story from work, casually dropping the name Derek into the narrative. Derek, her boss, had said the most hilarious thing. Derek had taken the team out for drinks to celebrate a new acquisition. Derek. It was a name dropped like a breadcrumb, leading me down a path of her choosing. One evening, I came home to find her on the phone, her back to me. Her laughter was a sound I hadn't heard directed at me in months. Light, carefree, almost giddy. The moment she sensed my presence, the tone shifted. The laughter died, and her voice became clipped, professional. Okay, got it. I'll see you tomorrow. She hung up without a goodbye. Who was that? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Just Sophie, she said, the lie so quick and smooth it was clear she'd practiced it. She didn't meet my eyes. The knot in my stomach tightened. I didn't press. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that confronting her then would only give her the satisfaction of a fight. That's what she wanted, a reaction, an explosion, something to justify the war she was already waging. A few nights later, the pieces began to click into place. I couldn't sleep, my mind a racetrack of anxieties. I went downstairs for a glass of water and heard voices from the study. Olivia and Sophie again, this time on a video call. The door was slightly ajar. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but Olivia's voice, laced with a triumphant glee, carried through the silent house. He doesn't suspect a thing, she said, followed by Sophie's high-pitched laugh. He just walks around with this sad, confused look on his face. It's almost pathetic. I froze, my hand on the banister, my blood turning to ice. Asterisk, what didn't I suspect? And Derek? Sophie asked. Oh, Derek is eating out of the palm of my hand, Olivia purred. And Liam? Liam would probably jump off a bridge if I asked him to. It's almost too easy. Derek. And Liam. Her co-worker, the kid who looked at her with wide-eyed adoration, like a supplicant before a goddess. The names hung in the air, damning and absolute. This wasn't just about making me jealous. This was a calculated campaign of betrayal. I backed away from the door, silent as a shadow, my mind reeling. I wanted to burst in, to smash the laptop, to scream until my throat was raw. But an ice-cold clarity washed over me. She wanted chaos. I would give her silence. The confirmation I didn't need, but couldn't ignore came while doing laundry. Tucked into the pocket of her jeans was a folded receipt. My hands trembled as I smoothed it out. It was from Vivant, an upscale French restaurant we'd talked about going to for years, for a special occasion that never seemed to arrive. The date was from last Friday, the night she claimed she was working late on a gallery installation. The total was obscene. And at the bottom, the detail that made my vision swim. Covers, 3. It wasn't just an affair. It was a public performance. She was dining with them, laughing with them, letting them pay for a meal at the very restaurant she knew held significance for us. She wasn't just cheating, she was desecrating our shared memories. That night, she walked through the door, humming, a contented smile on her face. I waited until she had poured herself a glass of wine and settled on the couch. How was your Friday night? I asked, my voice devoid of all emotion. She looked up, surprised by the question. Fine. I told you, I was at the gallery. It was exhausting. I walked over and dropped the receipt onto the coffee table in front of her. It landed with a soft, final thud. The one from Vivant. The one for 3 people. Her eyes darted from the receipt to my face. The color drained from her cheeks. For a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of panic, of guilt. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a hard, defiant mask. She crossed her arms, her chin lifting. Why does it matter, Ryan? She asked, her voice ablade. You're the one who started this. You're the one who let women like Jade into our life. Jade is a colleague, I said, my teeth clenched so tightly my jaw ached. That's it. And you know it. And so are Derek and Liam. She shot back, her eyes glinting with a cruel triumph. But maybe they're a little more than that now. The words were meant to be a killing blow, a confession designed to shatter me. But as I stood there, looking at the stranger sitting on my couch, I didn't feel shattered. I felt a profound, chilling sense of focus. The heartbreak was there, a dull, heavy ache deep in my chest, but it was being eclipsed by something else. Something cold and sharp. You're trying to hurt me, I stated, not as a question, but as a final diagnosis. She smirked. It was the ugliest expression I had ever seen on her beautiful face. Maybe I am, she said. Maybe you deserve it. She turned away, dismissing me, picking up her wine glass as if the conversation was over, as if she had just won. But I knew, standing there in the ruins of our living room, that this wasn't the end. This was a declaration of war. And if she thought I would simply crumble and surrender, she had forgotten who she married. The declaration hung in the air between us for days, a toxic fog that permeated every corner of our home. Olivia wore her confession like a suit of armor, expecting it to make her invincible. She moved with a new, brazen confidence, a woman who had seized control. But her victory was built on a lie, the lie that I was broken. In truth, her betrayal had cauterized a part of me I didn't know was bleeding. The pain was still there, a phantom limb that ached with memory, but in its place grew something harder, more resilient. I needed to understand the full scope of her campaign, not for closure, but for strategy. Her phone was the key. She treated it like a Horcrux, a vessel containing a piece of her new, secret soul. The opportunity came on a Sunday night. She was in the bath, the sound of running water and the scent of lavender filling the upstairs hall. Her phone was on the nightstand, charging. My heart hammered against my ribs as I picked it up. My hands were steady. I typed in the passcode. Our anniversary, the irony of bitter pill, and the screen flared to life. I started with Derek. The messages were a nauseating chronicle of her descent. It began with professional flattery, then bled into flirtatious compliments and thinly veiled innuendos. Then, it became explicit. Derek, you looked stunning in that red dress today. I can't stop thinking about it. Asterisk. Olivia, stop, you'll make me blush. But I can't stop thinking about last night either. When can we do it again? Asterisk. Derek, my calendar is wide open for you. Name the time and place. Asterisk. My stomach churned. I scrolled further, my thumb moving mechanically. The exchange with Liam was different, but no less damning. His messages were desperate, pathetic, dripping with an unrequited obsession she had clearly decided to indulge. Liam, Liv, you're amazing. I meant everything I said. I don't care about Ryan. He doesn't deserve you. Asterisk. Olivia, you're very sweet, Liam. Maybe I'll let you prove it to me again soon. Asterisk. Again star. The word was a punch to the gut. This wasn't a one-time mistake fueled by anger. This was a pattern. A deliberate, calculated campaign of infidelity designed for maximum damage. I put the phone back on the charger, my hands feeling unclean. The next step was to understand the player she had chosen. Derek I knew from company functions. A man whose charm was a predatory lubricant, all slick smiles and hands that lingered a moment too long. He thrived on the power he held over his subordinates. I reached out to Marcus, my closest friend, a man whose quiet demeanor belied a savant-like ability for navigating the digital and corporate underworld. I need you to find out everything you can about a guy named Derek Hale. I told him over coffee, my voice low. He's a director at Olivia's gallery. Marcus just nodded, his eyes telling me he understood this was more than idle curiosity. 2 days later, he sent me a file. Derek's career was pockmarked with quiet transfers and sealed settlements. Accusations of inappropriate relationships with junior staff had followed him from city to city, always swept under the rug by a corporate HR department keen on avoiding scandal. Olivia wasn't his first conquest. She was just the latest in a long line of women he'd used to feed his ego. He was a predator, and Olivia had willingly walked into his cage. Liam was a different animal. Marcus's digging unearthed a social media history that painted a pathetic picture. For years, Liam's posts were filled with cryptic allusions to a beautiful, unattainable coworker. Vague, emo captions about unrequited love and waiting for a sign. He wasn't just a coworker with a crush. He was an obsessive, a man who had built a fantasy around Olivia long before she ever gave him the time of day. He was the perfect pawn, malleable, desperate, and utterly disposable. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that illuminated the why, came from Olivia herself. I remembered a journal she used to keep, a beautiful leather-bound book she'd tucked away in a box in the back of our closet. My hands shook as I opened it. Her elegant script filled the pages, a timeline of her festering resentment. October 12th. Ryan's world is so perfect. His awards, his clients, the way people are drawn to him. It's like he's the sun, and I'm just a planet caught in his orbit. I feel like I'm fading. Asterisk. November 3rd. The text from Jade. He swore it was nothing, but I know better. He's lying. I can see it in his eyes. He's tired of me. He wants someone new, someone shiny like the people he works with. Asterisk. November 10th. Fine. If he wants to play games, so can I. Derek has been watching me for months. I see the way he looks at me. Maybe it's time I let him get a closer look. Maybe it's time Ryan felt what it's like to be second best. Asterisk. The words laid her soul bare. This wasn't about my perceived infidelity. That was just the excuse. This was about her own deep-seated insecurity, an inferiority complex that had metastasized into a monstrous need for control. She didn't want to hurt me because she thought I had cheated. She wanted to hurt me to feel powerful, to feel like she was the one pulling the strings. Armed with the truth, the texts, Derek's history, Liam's obsession, her own diary entries, the heartbreak within me finally solidified into something cold and hard as steel. She thought she was the puppet master, but she had revealed her entire strategy. That night, as I watched her sleep, her face peaceful and oblivious, I felt no love, no sorrow. Only a grim, chilling resolve. If she wanted to play a game, I would show her how it was won. This was no longer about saving our marriage. It was about dismantling hers. The night of her confession, after she had delivered the lines she'd clearly rehearsed, maybe they're a little more than that now. She sat back, waiting for the explosion. She wanted tears, rage, the satisfying crash of a man breaking. She had lit the fuse and was waiting for the dynamite to go off. Instead, I smirked. It was a small, quiet thing, a slight upturn at the corner of my mouth, but it was enough to shatter her composure. Her triumphant expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. I met her gaze, my own eyes cold and steady. "You know, Liv," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I only fight for things that have value." I paused, letting the words hang in the air between us. I don't waste my energy on trash. The silence that followed was absolute. Her mask didn't just crack, it disintegrated. The word, *trash*, struck her with more force than any physical blow could have. She wanted to be a villain, a femme fatale, a woman scorned and righteous in her revenge. She never imagined she would be dismissed as insignificant. She opened her mouth, then closed it, a fish gasping for air. The power dynamic in the room had just shifted, violently and irrevocably. I pushed my chair back from the table, the sound scraping against the floor. "I'm done with dinner," I said, my tone flat, detached. "Enjoy the rest of your evening." I walked away, leaving her there at the table, staring after me, her carefully constructed victory turning to ashes in her mouth. In the sanctuary of my study, I didn't fall apart. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a chilling clarity. The woman I had loved was gone, and this creature wearing her face had just revealed its single greatest weakness, its pride. The next morning, she tried to pretend it hadn't happened. She moved through the kitchen with a forced, brittle cheerfulness. "Morning," she chirped as I poured my coffee. I ignored her attempt at normalcy. "Morning." She hesitated, twisting a ring on her finger. "So, are we going to talk about last night?" I took a long, slow sip of my coffee, meeting her eyes over the rim of the mug. "No," I said. "There's nothing left to talk about." Her jaw tightened. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and left. Over the next few days, I watched her. She carried herself like a deposed queen, still clinging to the emblems of her power, but haunted by the knowledge that her reign was over. She laughed a little too loudly on the phone, dressed with a little too much precision. She was performing, trying to convince herself, and me, that she was unaffected, that my words hadn't landed. But I knew they had, because I had the truth. I had the printouts of her texts, the file on Derek, the screenshots of Liam's pathetic odes to her. While she thought her confession was the checkmate, I was quietly moving my own pieces, preparing for the endgame. Marcus came over one evening while she was out at one of her now frequent late nights. "She admitted it?" he asked, his disbelief evident. "To your face?" "Just like that." "Every detail," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Wore it like a badge of honor." He shook his head, a look of grudging respect in his eyes. "Man, I don't know how you held it together. How you didn't just lose it." "Because losing it is what she wanted," I replied, my gaze falling on the small stack of papers on my desk. She wanted a screaming match. She wanted me to beg. She wanted a scene. But she's about to find out that the quietest moves are always the most devastating. When Olivia came home that night, flushed and smiling from whatever charade she had just been performing, I played my part. I nodded, offered a tight smile, and let her believe that I was a broken man, adrift in the wreckage she had created. I let her think she had won. It was crucial to my strategy that she feel secure in her victory, because it's only when you believe you're standing on solid ground that an earthquake can truly destroy you. And the ground beneath Olivia's feet was about to give way. The fallout began not with a bang, but with a quiet, insidious erosion. Olivia's world, which she had so proudly destabilized to prove a point, began to crumble under its own weight. My calm dismissal of her actions had unnerved her. It wasn't the reaction she had planned for, and she didn't know how to recalibrate. She mistook my composure for apathy, believing she was still in control. She was wrong. The first crack appeared at her work. Derek, the slick predator, was a creature of self-preservation above all else. A discreetly worded, anonymous email to the gallery's board of directors, detailing a pattern of inappropriate behavior by a senior staff member and hinting at a potential lawsuit, was all it took. The email, carefully crafted by Marcus, mentioned no names but provided just enough detail about dates and locations, a business trip, a late-night meeting, to be undeniably pointed. A few days later, Olivia came home fuming. "Can you believe this?" she seethed, throwing her purse on the counter. "They're launching an internal review. Some anonymous complaint. Derek is barely looking at me. He's treating me like I have the plague." I looked up from my book, my expression a carefully crafted mask of mild interest. "That's strange," I said. "I'm sure it's nothing." But it was something. Derek was distancing himself, cutting the cord to the liability she had become. Her powerful ally was now her adversary, viewing her as a threat to his carefully managed career. Next came Liam. The obsessive, once her devoted puppy, was becoming a problem. With Derek icing her out, Olivia had no more use for him. She began ignoring his texts, declining his invitations for coffee. His desperation escalated into a frantic, suffocating obsession. Flowers began arriving at our house, then at her office. The notes attached grew more unhinged. Asterisk, I know you feel it too, Liv. Don't let him keep us apart. Asterisk. One night, she came home pale and shaking. "He was waiting for me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "In the parking garage. Just watching me." I felt a cold prickle of satisfaction, which I immediately buried under a veneer of concern. "You played with him, Olivia," I said, my voice even. "You used him to make a point. This is what happens when you treat people like they're disposable." Her grand revenge was turning messy, its loose ends fraying and tangling around her. The men she had used as weapons were now turning on her, one with cold indifference, the other with a frightening fixation. At home, we existed in a state of suspended animation. We were roommates sharing a mortgage, our conversations reduced to sterile logistics. But she was still watching me, studying me, trying to find a crack in my armor. She was looking for the anger, the pain, the man she thought she had broken. She couldn't find him. One evening, she made a desperate bid for a truce. She found me in the study, my back to her. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice small. I turned in my chair. She stood in the doorway, looking fragile, the defiant bravado stripped away. "I know things are broken," she began. "I feel like we're two strangers living in the same house." "We are," I said flatly. Tears welled in her eyes. "I was hurt, Ryan. I was so convinced you were cheating." "Stop," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "Stop using that as an excuse. The text was your pretext, not your reason. You were looking for a way to blow this all up because you felt insecure. You chose betrayal over conversation. That's not a mistake, Olivia. That's a character flaw." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "I made a mistake," she sobbed. "No," I said, standing and walking toward her until I was looking down at her, my voice low and unforgiving. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. What you did was a conscious, deliberate, and systematic demolition of everything we built. And you enjoyed it." She stood there, speechless and weeping, as I walked past her and out of the room. The foundation of her world was cracking, and the tremors were getting stronger. She thought her confession would be the final word, the act that would bring me to my knees. But all it had done was expose her own instability, her own rotten core. And as she stood alone in the hallway, crying for a life she had single-handedly destroyed, I was preparing to bring the whole structure down. The final confrontation wasn't born of rage, but of necessity. It was a strategic move, the culmination of weeks of silent observation and cold calculation. Olivia had tried to apologize, to cry her way back into a position of sympathy, but her apologies were hollow, self-serving. She wasn't sorry for the betrayal. She was sorry for the consequences. She still believed, on some level, that she was the victim. I needed to disabuse her of that notion, permanently and publicly. The opportunity presented itself on a Friday night. She had invited her inner circle over for drinks, Sophie and two other friends who had formed her loyal court. In the past, I would have made myself scarce. Tonight, I stayed. I played the part of the detached, wounded husband, nursing a drink in the corner, my silence a brooding presence in the room. Olivia was in her element, her laughter a little too loud, her stories a little too animated. She was performing for them, casting herself as the resilient woman navigating a difficult time. Halfway through the second bottle of wine, when the mood was relaxed and her guard was down, I made my move. I placed my glass on the mantel with a definitive click that silenced the room. "Olivia," I said, my voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight. "I think it's time we finally had that honest conversation you've been avoiding." Her smile froze on her face. A nervous flutter passed through her eyes. "Ryan, not now. We have guests." "No, I think this is the perfect time," I said, stepping into the center of the living room. "Because your friends deserve to know the real story. Not the edited version I'm sure you've been feeding them." The air crackled with tension. Sophie shot Olivia a panicked look. The other two women shifted uncomfortably on the couch. "What are you talking about?" Olivia asked, her voice a strained whisper. I took a breath, holding the attention of everyone in the room. "I'm talking about your grand revenge. I'm talking about you confessing to me, with a smile on your face, that you slept with your boss, Derek." A collective, sharp intake of breath. Sophie's face went white. "And not just him." I continued, my gaze locked on Olivia, pinning her in place. "Also with your coworker, Liam. The one you've been complaining about for the last week." Olivia looked as if she'd been turned to stone. "Ryan, stop," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Why? Are you embarrassed?" I asked, my voice devoid of pity. "You weren't embarrassed when you did it. You weren't embarrassed when you threw it in my face. You did all of this. You torched our marriage, because you found a professional text message on my phone and decided that was justification enough to betray every promise we ever made to each other." Her friends stared at her, their expressions a sickening collage of shock, pity, and dawning disgust. The narrative Olivia had so carefully crafted, of the neglected wife and the potentially straying husband, was being incinerated before their eyes. "I made a mistake," she finally choked out, tears streaming down her face. "No, Olivia," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, final tone. "A mistake is an accident. What you did was a choice. A series of choices. You chose to lie. You chose to cheat. You chose to try and destroy me. And now, you have to choose how to live with that." The silence that followed was profound and damning. Her bravado was gone, her armor shattered, leaving her exposed and utterly humiliated. For the first time, I saw the full, crushing weight of her actions settle upon her, not as a temporary consequence, but as a permanent stain on her character. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her to the judgment of her friends. As I closed the bedroom door behind me, the muffled sound of their whispers was the only sound. It hadn't been an act of vengeance. It was an act of truth. She had built her identity on a foundation of perceived perfection and moral superiority. I had simply held up a mirror and forced her to see the monster she had become. The battle was over. There was nothing left to fight for and nothing left to save. The aftermath was a deafening silence. The house, once a stage for our picture-perfect life, became a mausoleum. Olivia's friends evaporated. Sophie, her ride-or-die confidant, stopped calling. The judgment in their eyes that night had been a verdict, and Olivia had been found guilty. There is nothing more isolating than being abandoned by the very people you enlisted to validate your poor choices. For days, Olivia moved through the house like a wraith, her vibrant energy extinguished. The sharp clothes were replaced by shapeless sweats. The makeup was gone, revealing pale skin and dark circles under her eyes. She tried to speak to me once or twice, her voice a hoarse whisper, but the words died on her lips. What was there to say? I didn't engage. My silence wasn't a punishment, it was a boundary. The space between us was no longer a battlefield, it was a void. The consequences she had set in motion continued their brutal, indifferent march. The internal review at her gallery concluded, and Derek was quietly transferred to a consulting role in another state, a corporate execution. Olivia was not fired, but she was demoted, moved to a back-office position with no creative control, a gilded cage where she could do no more damage. Liam, her other weapon, had finally imploded. After the parking garage incident, he had shown up at the gallery, causing a scene that resulted in security escorting him out and a permanent restraining order. Her revenge had cost 2 men their jobs and her own career its trajectory. One evening, I began to pack. I moved with a calm, methodical purpose, folding shirts and placing books into boxes. The actions were mundane, but they felt monumental, like a rite of passage. Olivia found me in the bedroom, standing in the doorway, a ghost at the edge of her own life. "Please," she whispered, her voice broken. "Don't go. We can fix this. I can fix this. We can try again." I stopped, a half-folded sweater in my hands. I looked at her, truly looked at her, for a long moment. I didn't see the monster anymore. I just saw a sad, broken woman, shipwrecked on the shores of her own making. And I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not love. Just a profound and final emptiness. "You already made your choice, Olivia," I said, my voice gentle but absolute. "Now I'm making mine." Her sob was a wounded, animal sound. It followed me down the stairs, out the front door, and into the cool night air. I didn't look back. As I drove away from the home we had built and she had burned, I didn't feel the exultation of a victor. The fallout had scorched me too. But through the smoke, I could see the horizon. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt the promise of a new day. I found a small, sterile apartment across town, a place with no memories etched into its walls. For weeks, I did nothing but work out, and sleep. I was rebuilding myself, brick by boring brick. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected, spent weekends hiking trails I'd never seen, and slowly, the color began to return to my world. Months later, I was grabbing coffee when I heard a familiar laugh. Olivia was at a nearby table. She looked diminished. Smaller, somehow. She was with a man I didn't recognize. She saw me, and for a second, our eyes met across the crowded cafe. There was a flash of pain in her gaze, of regret, of 1,000 unspoken things. I gave her a small, neutral nod, then turned and walked out. Her story was no longer my story. It was a year later when I met Elena. She was an architect, a woman who built things rather than tore them down. Our relationship was quiet, steady, and built on a foundation of honesty so simple it felt revolutionary. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of my apartment, watching the city lights blink on, she asked me about my past. "You were married before, weren't you?" she asked gently. "I was," I said, looking out at the sprawling metropolis. "What happened?" I thought for a moment, not about the anger or the betrayal, but about the lesson learned. I learned that sometimes the best way to win a war is to walk away from the battlefield and build a new life so good you forget the war ever happened. Elena smiled and slipped her hand into mine. Her touch was warm, real. As I sat there, a cool breeze on my face, her hand in mine, I realized the ultimate truth. Olivia's revenge had been a desperate, pathetic attempt to prove her own value by diminishing mine. But my revenge, my true, final revenge, was not in her downfall, but in my own quiet, unassailable happiness. I hadn't just survived. I was thriving. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered.